And like that, it's a wrap. Welcome to the final edition of NFL Power Rankings. It is presented by Energizer. Mike Am and Eric Edholm with you. The final set of rankings. We know how it'll play at the top, but we'll do a deep dive on all of the top teams in the NFL. For full analysis of all the squads, scan the QR code, or you can just head to NFL.com. Fans in Philly, they're always happy, Eric, and I know they're happy with you right now.
They are happy they can go back and read the power rankings for about 3 weeks ago when I had them listed fourth among the final four teams. I had a lot of people, to their credit, who hit me up at the time and said less kind versions of "you're wrong, dude." And they reminded me about, 6 minutes after the Super Bowl ended. So showed a little restraint as well. I'm kind of proud of them.
You can't make everyone happy, but those fans should be thrilled by the final result of what we witnessed in the Super Bowl. All right, let's get through the rankings here. 1 through 8, not a surprise. The Philadelphia Eagles sitting in that top spot. Congratulations to Jalen Hurts, the game MVP. The Chiefs, they dropped that spot. They've been kind of hitting in that top spot for a while at number 1. It's the Bills, the Lions, and the Ravens rounding out 3, 4, and 5. The Commanders, what an amazing season. You think about where they were at the start of the power rankings. You could see a plus 20. The biggest move, we will do a deep dive on them in just a few minutes. The Minnesota Vikings, also a team on a rise as well, up 16 spots from where they landed in the first edition of the Power Rankings. And the Green Bay Packers, your 8th squad. All right, let's take a closer look at the Philadelphia Eagles. Take me through this. What did we not necessarily see happening that explains why this team is a Super Bowl champion?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you kind of look back at their season and think about, they had the 2-2 start. They went into the bye. Turnovers were an issue. Those were the biggest questions of the season. They didn't lose a game after that in which Jalen Hurts started and finished the game. It was that one loss to Washington where Kenny Pickett played most of it. So maybe we underestimated these Eagles coming in just a little bit. I finally switched my pick right before kickoff and said I think Philly's going to win. I had no idea they would blow out a team on the verge of history like this, like the Chiefs were. So good in postseason situations, so good in the clutch time. But they finished on defense and they did just enough offensively to make it a successful day. Got the passing game going early. You knew they were going to gang up on Saquon Barkley and take him out of the game as best they could. They did. Held him under 100 yards total on 30-plus touches. But, boy, they still couldn't keep him out of the end zone. Jalen Hurts outside of that one throw was spectacular. And how about Vic Fangio's defense? Absolutely dominating from the start. Really didn't let up until they were up 34-0, not even then. But, boy, an absolutely outstanding performance from a coach and from a unit that I don't know that's gotten quite the respect that they deserved throughout the course of the season. They were mostly terrific this year, and you saw the upgrades that they made on all 3 levels this offseason. And a coordinator, too. Fangio, arguably has a Hall of Fame type resume for an assistant coach.
I don't want to be overly dramatic here. Is this a budgeting dynasty? 2 Super Bowl appearances in 3 seasons, young defense, got your quarterback locked up. Is this something that we're going to see in the years to come?
I think they're going to, if you ask me right now who the favorites are next year, I think you'd say Philly. Now, that's pre-free agency, pre-draft, pre-cutdowns, all that stuff. So there's a lot to be figured out. But if you had to have one team to sort of say, who do you think could win it next year? Why not Philly, right? For all the reasons you just stated. And I think, Jalen Hurts kind of getting that monkey off his back, so to speak, right? Everybody's sort of putting a ceiling on him and not believing he actually can win a Super Bowl. Well, he proved that wrong after all the ups and downs he's endured from Alabama to his first head coach in Philly to now with Nick Sirianni. They've seen the mountaintop, and I think they could be back there, whether it's next year or beyond that. So, yeah, maybe it's not what we've seen from the Chiefs' level of success, but you bet they could be.
All right, where do the Chiefs go from here?
Great question, right? We still have to figure out what's Travis Kelce's future, right? What are the plans for the offensive line that had a really rough day? I understand that they went into that game maybe not wanting to change the chemistry up front after they'd made some switches, patched holes as best they could. But it became obvious that pass rush was too much for them, and I think you could be talking about multiple offensive line spots this offseason that need addressing, whether it's Trey Smith leaving in free agency, that left tackle spot. You'd ideally move Joe Thuney back to left guard, his best home. We hear now about DeAndre Hopkins possibly retiring. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. He deleted a tweet that said he's still got some football left, but we'll find out what their plans are at receiver, on the offensive line. And also on defense, I think they probably need some more pass rush force to penetrate good lines like the Philadelphia Eagles. They just weren't able to do it consistently enough.
Yeah, I know it's disappointing for Chiefs fans. This was still a really good season. This team's still not going anywhere, especially considering how they've drafted over the last couple of years. The Bills sit at number 3 here. I think they silenced a lot of critics who were concerned about massive changes to personnel. How big is this window for Buffalo?
Yeah, I mean, I think a year ago, a lot of people were suggesting that, okay, they let a slew of veterans go on the first day of free agency. This is the bloodletting. Josh has missed his window. They're going to have to go through some sort of period of rebuild. Well, look, if having the ball with a chance to win in the fourth quarter of the AFC Championship game is a rebuild, then I think they're in pretty decent shape. Yeah. Remember, they didn't get a ton out of Keon Coleman, their top draft pick this year, the top receiver, who didn't perform on the same level Xavier Worthy did. I think he can make a step. I think the defense obviously needs some reinforcements, but Josh is still in the prime of his career. We saw guys like Khalil Shakir break out. Wasn't even the best year from Dalton Kincaid. So, I think they have the chance to be even more explosive offensively the next year. The question is, with limited resources this offseason, only so much cap space, only so high draft picks, how are they going to be able to add layers to that defense, which to me, by the end of the season, you saw a depleted group, but one that, for the most part, I thought held together pretty well throughout the course of the season.
Yeah, look, attrition is an issue for a lot of teams in the NFL, and I think you saw some of that. Buffalo probably did a better job than most weathering that storm. Much like the number 4 team, I think we forget about the Detroit Lions and the amount of injuries that they had throughout the course of this season, and yet an opportunity still to potentially even make it to a Super Bowl. They're going to be facing the same thing the Eagles faced a couple seasons ago coming off of that Super Bowl run, losing both of their coordinators. What's the fallout for that change?
If they make the wrong decisions, like the Eagles arguably did, they moved on from both coordinators from last season, it sets you back a year. But as they proved this season, if you make the right hires, 1 year later, you can go win the Super Bowl. So, I know we think in terms of windows and how long this team can get going. Obviously, Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn are a big part of their success, and this can't be overlooked. Other multiple assistants have left as well. So, this is a big challenge for Dan Campbell as Goff kind of heads into the back half of his career. Maybe Kevin Zeitler moves on, some other pieces in free agency. They still have to fix that defense and add layers of talent to that. We saw how it broke down at the end of the year. So, this is no easy climb back up the mountaintop. But again, I think there's a real strong belief and now a pattern history of success over 2.5 seasons that, this team isn't going anywhere, I don't think, until proven otherwise. But that OC position, Ben Johnson did work some magic at times, and they're going to have to find somebody who can match that.
I know we haven't even hit the NFL draft. You were at the Senior Bowl. I was at the Shrine Bowl. We know that there's going to be some talented players available. The Lions have done a really nice job in the draft building this roster. Do we look at, and just kind of assuming hey, they'll make some additions here that'll be positive for this team. Do we look at the Lions as still on the short list? I don't know where you're shouldn't even be talking about rankings for next season on our last show, but I got to imagine, in terms of complete teams, they're one of 3 or 4 in the NFL that you would point to.
Have to be. I think they absolutely are. In fact, my preseason top 4 might look pretty similar to what I've got here on this wrap up of the 24 season. So yeah, the Lions will be right up there among the heavyweight contenders. We know they can score 40 on any given day. They were playing very good defense prior to Aiden Hutchinson's injury, which just sort of started the avalanche. It seemed like every week they dropped a starter or two. You saw it happen to the Dolphins late in the 23 season, and they collapsed completely. This is a better roster, I think, than what Miami had put together. And so, I firmly believe that they're going to be among the contenders next year. But again, like Philly 2023, there's no guarantee. They started out 10-1 with those 2 new coordinators and ended up letting both go by the end of the season. So you never know in this league, and people make rash decisions in, tense situations.
Yeah, I think, look, you take some heat on social media for these rankings, and I'll probably take some heat for this. I know the AFC, by and large, better conference than the NFC, but if you say to me the most complete teams heading into next season, regardless of the draft, because obviously rosters are going to change, Eagles are in that conversation, the Lions are right there, and based off of the personnel, I'd put the Baltimore Ravens in front of all those other teams, just based off of roster. I get it here.
Yep.
There's still Kansas City and Buffalo, just making that point. There are some teams that are on the rise, and there is one that I am thinking about in a big way. Time for Power Moves, presented by Energizer. It is the Washington Redskins. I think about this trajectory. Week 1 of the season, you had them 26 in your rankings. They took a loss. They dropped all the way down to 29 in week number 2. And in the final rankings, they're the 6th ranked team. What an accomplishment for Dan Quinn in year number 1. And it helps to have the QB1 of your future, and maybe QB1 for the NFL over the next few years.
If you had bought stock in the Commanders back in week 1, even week 2, and I knocked them down a few pegs, right? This is like buying Bitcoin in 2012. You're doing okay for yourself, right? In fact, I remember on Twitter posting my initial rankings, number 26, and a local Commanders writer said, I think this is the highest I've seen so far. So I wasn't the only one. In fact, I guess I had a more rosy view of them than others, but love what Adam Peters did to the roster. Love the addition of, obviously, Jaden Dales. I thought he'd be a great hit with Cliff Kingsbury. Didn't imagine it would be so successful year 1. But in a lot of ways, they're kind of in the same position the Houston Texans found themselves in 1 year ago, right? They were coming off a successful playoff run. They won the division. The record wasn't quite as impressive as what Washington did, obviously, but young quarterback sort of thrust into the spotlight in the discussion as one of the, the top young quarterbacks in the game today. There's going to be a lot of pressure on them. Now the expectations are there. They're going to be a winning team next season. That's sort of the belief around the campfire. So we'll find out how much more magic can they do. They have to add on that defense. I feel like we've said that about every contender except the Eagles, but they absolutely, facing teams like Dallas, like Philly every year, are going to have to tighten things up on that side of the ball. But boy, like you said, the future is so bright down there all of a sudden. Think about what a year has done to the outlook of this entire franchise, not just the football team, but just the top to bottom, the whole thing.
Yeah, I think that's why there's so many teams that are looking for a quarterback right now in this year's NFL draft. They'll point to the Washington Commanders and say, hey, one guy can really change the trajectory of our entire franchise. By the way, before we even anoint them, we know sometimes it's not always a given, right? The Houston Texans, we were kind of talking about C.J. Stroud this way, and they were still a playoff team. They were dealing with some injuries, but it's just not a lock and a guarantee that you're going to be able to duplicate success from year to year. So just to keep in mind here and just temper some of those expectations for Commanders fans. Although I think you and I feel like it's going to be really a great season next year. More to come here on Power Rankings. How high up do the Rams, the Broncos, and Bengals deserve to be? That answer's coming up next. Back here on Power Rankings, Mike M and Eric Edholm with you as you take a look at his squads ranked 9 through 16. We'll do a deep dive on the Bucs. The Houston Texans, so much expectations around C.J. Stroud. I think they figured it out late in the season, a little too late though. The Rams, maybe the most intriguing team, at least in my mind, in this grouping. The Chargers, we know that arrow is pointing up. The Broncos sitting at number 13. The Steelers got some real decisions to make this offseason at 14. Cincinnati at 15. Boy, I was on that train for most of this season. And at 16, it is the Seattle Seahawks. All right, break this down for me because the Bucs are a team that's consistently really good and yet haven't necessarily been able to break through. What's it going to take?
Yeah, Tom Brady coming out of retirement. No, I'm kidding. Obviously, Baker Mayfield's done a tremendous job, right? And, they're changing offensive coordinators for roughly the 37th year in a row. Don't quote me on that fact, but it's something like that. And, Mike Evans, look, he was terrific. He got his 1,000 yards last year, but he's in the final year of his contract. Chris Godwin's potentially moving on in free agency. Playing in this division, obviously, it gives them an advantage, right? Carolina's still figuring things out. Atlanta's starting over a little bit with Michael Penix, right? So they're going to win football games. But to your point, how do they break through? I think getting better depth and health on defense is a big part of it. But obviously, another play caller, another system. Mayfield sort of answered the call, reinvented his career. It's been fun to watch, but can he do it again? Maybe he's got to take a page out of Jalen Hurts' book, right? Another guy who's been through his share of OCs and follow that path to success.
All right, the Denver Broncos are 13, and I think a little bit of a different scenario as they're trying to break through. I look at your week 1 rankings. You had them 27th. They move up to 13th in the final one. And look, that's a remarkable job from Sean Payton and this crew. They got it right. They hit the home run with Bo Nix. What's that missing piece for this team?
Yeah, I think obviously defensively they're pretty strong. I think the offensive line has the parts. I think you'd like to see another weapon or two in this offense. And think back to what Sean Payton had in New Orleans. He always had that X factor, as he likes to call it, that joker, right? Whether it was Jimmy Graham or Jeremy Shockey at tight end, Taysom Hill is kind of a multi-tool piece, Alvin Kamara, Reggie Bush, whatever you want to say. They had those kind of guys who were matchup nightmares from the running back position, from tight end. They don't really have that. They tried 4 different backs last year, 5 guys really, 3 different tight ends. They all had their strengths, but they really, I think, want one difference maker. And if they can find that player in the draft, that would be terrific. I know they don't, not anxious to spend a bunch of money in free agency, but just tighten a few things up defensively, already a top 10 unit. And then if they can give Bo Nix that one special playmaker, we see a player who played at a pretty darn high level as a rookie who could be able to elevate even further. So I'm excited to see what they do in this offseason and who they target.
All right, 2 teams with the biggest jumps, the Commanders and the Broncos here. The team you feel most confident in duplicating success or maybe even just leveling up next year. Which one would you pick between those 2?
That's a great question, because obviously the expectations for the Commanders are going to be sky high, even playing in the same division as the Eagles, the team that knocked them out of the playoffs. But, I would probably say Tampa Bay has, they can fly below the radar a little bit and also play in the weaker division. So maybe that factors in. We still haven't seen how the schedule lays out or what happens in free agency. But right now, even Jaden Daniels is the better quarterback. They beat the Bucs head to head in the playoffs in Tampa. But, as far as like expectations and playing above that or equal to that, wouldn't be shocking if the Tampa Bay Buccaneers end up with more wins than expected, if that makes sense.
No question. I mean, those 3 teams in general, you throw them into the basket, you pull out a name, and you're like, all right, like that team could be pretty good this upcoming season. Now, we're talking about teams that have made the huge jump. There's some squads that didn't necessarily live up to the expectations that we thought. Oh, I feel bad for you, Brock. Like, I get it. Eric actually had him as number 2 team heading into the season. Are they even contenders moving forward? The answer to that is coming up next. Back here on Power Rankings, Mike Am and Eric at home with you, team 17 through 24. The Arizona Cardinals, this was a good season for them. They did move up, and I know there were some issues as the season unfolded for them, but they're at 17. The Dolphins, injury bug in a big way at 18. The Falcons, the way this season had turned out for them, but Michael Penix is waiting in the wings at 19. The Colts at 20. San Francisco 49ers, we'll get to in a moment, here at 21. The Bears at 22. They dropped 6 spots from that original ranking. The Dallas Cowboys at 23. And the Carolina Panthers, the arrow is pointing up for that franchise. All right, let's focus in on this Niners squad. I think this is the most intriguing team in the entire list. You had them number 2 before the season starts. They fall to now 21. There's no way on the preseason rankings, correct me if I'm wrong here, they're going to be outside the top 20, right?
It would be hard to do, right? Even if they end up trading Deebo Samuel, as has been reported and rumored. I think, obviously it depends on what happens this season, right? Or this offseason, I should say. But it seems to me like they're focusing on re-signing Purdy, giving him his long-term deal. How long, we'll see. And then elevating one of those other receivers, whether it's Ricky Pearsall, their first-round pick, or Jawan Jennings, and trying their best to get what they can for Deebo. Remember, they tried to trade Brandon Ayuk last year. He ended up getting hurt. Christian McCaffrey getting hurt. Trent Williams missing time. Virtually every single one of the key players that they couldn't lose missed at least one game, if not more. So, that's the reason they sunk so far. Am I going to raise them all the way back up to number 2? Right now, that feels a little bit unlikely, but Kyle Shanahan, proven history of success in November, December. I mean, I feel it's safe to say they'll be somewhere around that top 10.
You will get a random text from me this summer, and I'll be on vacation poolside somewhere with a little umbrella drink and the whole thing, and I'm going to say, you're going to have the Niners in the top 10? Just be prepared for that one. The Dallas Cowboys, at this point, sitting at number 23. Is this as simple as McCarthy out and they get a shot in the arm with Schottenheimer?
I think if you send me that same text with the Cowboys with the little drink and everything, the emoji, I don't know that I can give you that same answer, right? It might be a little different than what we say about the 49ers. This feels to me a little bit New York Jets-ish in the sense that, hey, I know our plan last year didn't work, but let's mostly run it back. Let's take the guy who was essentially the first lieutenant for Mike McCarthy and make him the head man. I mean, if that's all it takes, then truly, I give a lot of credit to Jerry Jones for being patient and saying we're going to see this thing through. But the other half of me is questioning whether this is the right move. Yes, this is a team that went 36-15 over 3 years before that, but they fell to 7-10. And even if injuries were part of the story, Dak missing a big chunk of the year, I don't know that they're going to be a complete football team with the likes of the Ravens and the Lions and the Eagles and the other teams that we mentioned at the top of the show. Those teams are more complete right now. So we'll see what the plan is. But, maybe Schottenheimer does give him a little energy, a little fresh perspective. Can he bring him through to the promised land, what Mike McCarthy couldn't do? I have my questions right now.
Yeah, I was talking to Isaiah Stanback, who does Good Morning Football right after the decision to go with Schottenheimer. He said, hey, verbiage, language, all going to be same for Dak, which is definitely a huge bonus heading into next season. At sitting 25 through 32, the Jets at 25, we know there's going to be massive changes there. The Patriots at 26. The Raiders, what do they do with the draft at 27? The Saints have a new coach officially. Kellen Moore is their guy at 29. It's the Jags. The G-Men at 30. The Tennessee Titans might be thinking about QB1 at 31 in the draft, and the Cleveland Browns, your last place team. I want to focus in on the Patriots because we've had some squads, Eric, that were kind of in this range and became top 15 teams. Can the Patriots do that?
I think if there's one you bet on, right, like you said, every single year somebody in this range ends up sort of thriving the next year. We've seen Drake May play very well. Mike Vrabel comes in. Josh McDaniels comes back for a third tenure in New England. And yes, they have a lot of holes to fill, but when you have over $100 million of salary cap space, a good till of draft picks, and the willingness to spend, I think they're in for a big offseason, and that could lead to more victories next year. So yeah, they're one of the leading candidates from this bottom group.
Crossed for the Patriots. You're the best, Eric. Always appreciate working with you, man.